Before picking up some of the questions on Q&A, I just want to go around our panelists to get everyone's perspective as well. Can I have our panelists to bring back your video, and we'll just go around the table. Okay, perfect. Jeff, could you get started first?
Okay, so I guess I'm going to speak mainly from the CBO perspective, because having been a MAC member for some time, been a recreational model pilot, I think that this is a great move for Transport Canada to start recognizing the safe practices that MAC members have been undertaking for a number of years, for 50 plus years. So I'm all in for Transport Canada, removing some of the restrictions that they've imposed on MAC members in the past 5 to 6 years.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Jeff. And later on, we do have a couple of Mac-related questions in Q&A. I'm already seeing them, so we'll circle back with you. Next, Mark.
Thank you, Yivi. I'll just talk a little bit about my concerns with remote ID. And I'm hoping that the Transport Canada has considered some of the issues that the FAA had on implementing remote ID in the US. We still have the concern, as you mentioned, on the security of drone pilots. Being able to detect where the pilot is rather than just that there's a drone in the air. And you mentioned another point, who determines whether a drone is flying legally or illegally? The other thing, point two, is issuing, when the regulations come into effect, the requirement for drones to have remote ID turned on. So that's a one-way transmission. Are they going to issue the new regs without identifying the means of receiving that transmission and acting on it? Or is it just going to be, okay, drone pilots, you just need to comply, you transmit, and then we'll see what happens in receiving and determining what we do with detecting drones and or drone pilots' location. So that needs some thought, and I hope Transport Canada is looking at how it was done in the States and the concerns they had, and whatever lessons learned there is with the implementation in the States, and ensuring that we correct those issues here in Canada.
Yeah, so on that note, we're going to expand more on that angle as well, because there are also other countries that have similar to remote ID that can detect the drone's operating information, right? And that information is sent to a centralized system where enforcement actually happens. So would that be something similar in Canada? That's also one angle.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Next, Nicholas.
Hi, everybody. Nick here. I am I think in general, I'm in supportive of remote ID as a concept. I think there are some caveats that need to be worked out from the discussion. Specifically, I think remote ID can be helpful for Transport Canada authorities to actually enforce the regulations that they've put in place. I also think it can be helpful for police departments to help enforce regulations. I don't think I'm in general support of the general public being able to access that information, and figuring out a way that that information can be available to those that need it and not those that shouldn't, I think is a technical challenge that needs to be clarified in the regulations. However, the caveat I would have to that is if there is obviously something that's happening that is illegal, and somebody wants to report it, but they right now just see a drone fly away and it's gone, there should be some functionality to allow those people to be able to report to police, even if they can't get the information of where the pilot is. Again, that's more of a technical challenge, maybe not a regulatory issue. And then, as well as Mark pointed out, I think the technical side of this, exactly how the remote ID is being transmitted, exactly how it is being received, and exactly how it is being recorded, if at all, is a key point that these regulations are right now, I don't think, address. And so open for that discussion as well.
And if I can add to that, it's also about timing. Is when is it detected? Is it captured, recorded in some way, right? Or is it can only happen in real time if you happen to be in the area or turn on the device. While it's there, you can see it. So first question here is, I have a Mini 5 and adding anything to it would make it over the weight limit. Has TC addressed this problem? I'll just quickly add a note that from, I believe DJI, I believe when US and Europe first introduced remote ID, DJI published a list of drone models that are compatible with remote ID. It goes as far back as Air 2, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'll definitely pull out the list, and we'll be providing a link of that in the resources when we release the recorded videos to everyone. So majority of the DJI drones today should have built-in remote ID. At one time, I remember there was a firmware update, and then with that update, I saw there was an option to turn on or off the remote ID function. So DJI's statement was pretty much they're able to release a firmware update to implement this on any of the drone models listed on the remote ID list. Back to our panels. Anyone would like to add anything to that?
I'll jump in. Yeah. So I think from a broadcast standpoint, yes, I think both DJI and Skydio are compatible right now. It's basically just needs to be turned on in the Canadian environment. And then doing some research, if you create a network requirement, so if it's not just broadcast from the drone, but it actually has to connect to some kind of network that can then be accessed anywhere, that requirement would require both a software update for the ground control station, and then as well as some backend that has to be maintained by some third party. All in all, doesn't require an attachment to those existing drones, which I think is the important point. That is for the majority of the fleet. But if you're building something yourself or you're not using, the market leaders, that's where I think the real challenge is with meeting these requirements.
And just quickly connecting that to the CBOs as well, right? So part of the CBOs, it's about allowing operations outside of Part 9, which means when remote ID comes into place, it will be if you're operating on CBO related sites, like on the Mac side, you don't have to turn on remote ID. So that was supposed to be one of the assumptions. Next question is, how will remote ID work with older drones? This is related to the topic we just had. So if your drone is on the compatible list, great. If your drone is not on the compatible list, there are third-party add-ons, right? You can choose to add on to that. Obviously, that's not going to solve the other related question on if you use a Mini, it will push it over 250 grams. At that point, that becomes a small RPAS, no longer a micro RPAS, right? And also another part to that is there have been 4G dongles available on different types of models, right? So when Nick was talking about network capability, so that is an option, but it also ties into the reality of what is the 4G or 5G coverage in Canada, realistically speaking. Okay, moving on to next question. Assuming the amendments go as proposed, would it make sense for organizations such as AlteX to establish CBO on campus? Would it make current operations more or less restrictive? This is something before joining Transport Canada's info session on CBO. This is something actually we thought about, right? It would be nice to have a blanket that allows pilots while they're training or flying here. But after joining TC's info session, I believe the CBO is really for Mac and related similar type of organizations. So when we say qualified organizations, one of the qualification is it must be a nationwide multi-site, right? So this cannot be, even including some of the universities at the session were asking what happens if we just have one research facility or one university located here. So that's not the purpose of CBO based on that info session. And also the second part to that is CBOs. For example, if pilots fly there, they don't have to register their drones with Transport Canada. CBOs need to maintain a registration list of pilots and planes like any RPAS at that point that's operated under the CBO, right? So this is also where it really separates if anyone who's flying under CARS Part 9, we don't see the need of going to apply for CBO. So that's pretty much, and I'll let Jeff jump in on anything related to CBO as well.
Yeah, you mentioned that, yeah, one of the criteria is being a national organization. I mean, there would be potential for, university organizations to maybe combine into one, central, organization that could then apply for something like that, that wouldn't limit the STEM potential, right? The, science, technology, engineering, and things. So, there's still potential for other organizations other than Mac, although this all seems very tailored to Mac. It's kind of like opening up the doors that were closed on Mac, several years ago. So
Right. And I just remember there was also the recreational requirement, right? This cannot be for commercial purposes for the CBO.
correct. Although as we've discussed before, Mac does operate some commercial activity in terms of flight reviews on Mac sites. So there's a bit of a contradiction there.
So again, this is why we're in the proposal period, right? So a lot of this can be sent back as feedback or how the industry would like to operate it. So there's still that opportunity there. Okay. Next question, how will remote ID make it safer for manned aircraft to be aware of a drone that may be infringing on their airspace, such as the TCAS system? That's a good question. I mean, two sides to that. First is manned aircraft is where would they be operating, right? So if manned aircraft is or crewed aircraft, if we use the correct term right now, is if they're operating 500 feet and above the ground level, then that's the intended airspace separation, right? So how will remote ID make it safer? Right now, if without proper detection and enforcement, a pilot can choose to say I fly more than 500 feet above ground level. No one's gonna find out anyway, or someone can say I forgot. I changed my units of measurement. I changed from, let's say, feet to meters, and I forgot about it, right? And then I accidentally went over the 500 feet. So with remote ID, obviously you can see from the remote ID information how high the drone is if it's going into unintended airspace. And that's definitely helping for crewed aircraft to have a clear separation. But also on the other end is how can drones, like if we talk about just in general airspace conflicts, how do we make sure drones have a clear separation, right, from crewed aircraft? It goes from the other side as well. Is would the smaller aircraft that currently don't have transponder or don't turn on transponder, right, would they be turning on transponder and also integrating into the national airspace so drone pilots can also see them? So it's both sides of that table. It's, like we always look at, yes, a $1,500 drone such as Mini 5 can support remote ID functions, right? So then there's definitely a means for technology to create the platform where all aircraft can share a certain degree of information and operate safely.
So just a comment there. So it's interesting, that question. How does manned aircraft determine that a drone is in their airspace? I'm not sure how well that is defined right now with Transport Canada. We talk about designated airspace as well as part of the NPA. Is it going to be, part of the regulations where for up to 400 feet is designated to be for drones and manned aircraft, regardless of whether it's designated airspace or not, for drones, they have no priority. Well, actually, it should be below 500 feet, but certainly if it's close to 400 or just under that, they don't have the priority. And because right now it's they have the priority for any level of airspace, as I see it.
One of the proposals I guess as part of the CBO aspect is, removing the 400-foot ceiling in, where it's approved, right? Where Transport Canada approves it for MAC fields. Because some flying activity, like using jets and things like that, does sometimes go above that. Like I don't know many MAC members that fly even close to 400 feet because you can't see most of the aircraft. So I'm getting back to Mark's point, like how are they going to see it? Well, how are they going to track which fields, MAC fields have a higher limit and which don't? Like, that's going to make it very difficult. So.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the concerns as well. And that also ties into our designated drone airspace topic later. So we'll also get there. Okay, next question. Actually, next two questions are related to the same topic. Are they proposing any special carve-outs for first responders? I don't disagree with being able to identify any RPAS flying in the area, but I do have concerns with the public being able to find where the pilot is located. As a fire service, we already have issues with people racing to the scenes to capture content for social media. The last thing we need is any more bystanders coming to the scene. And related to that, the next question is, I have concerns about general public being able to track down the base station while I'm operating. So both are related to that, right? So my first note about public safety is, if we look at current cars, is public safety does have priority, right? So if there's a public safety operation, doesn't matter if they use drones or not, is other drone pilots, civilian drone pilots cannot just go fly their drone to that scene that interferes with the existing public safety operation. So that part is definitely already written in cars. And by having remote ID, then at least, let's say for public safety, you should be able to see if any other unauthorized drones show up in the space, find the pilot, and then have subsequent actions from there. Then from the second perspective to this, it's about going back to, yes, general public. Should general public to really see remote ID information? What can they see? How much can they see? That's all part of the discussion, right? So one example I'll give is earlier when we talk about timeline, when do they see that information and what actions are being taken about that. So to give one example, if anyone's been following the past 6 months of drone regulations and enforcement in China, there has been a major complaint from drone pilots in China about very restrictive, how things have turned very restrictive. So what turned restrictive is not so much the regulation, but it's the enforcement, right? So the invisible Skynet exists. If you fly there and your drone went over, for example, 400 feet, while the pilot was packing, there were multiple reports. They said while the pilot was packing, they already received a text message on their phone that said your drone went over 400 feet, right? You violated such and such rules, and here's your fine. Pay for your fine now digitally. So that's how effective the enforcement is they didn't need someone to see that information physically go to the pilot. They detect it through the signal, and they also attach that signal of that drone, the serial number, to the phone number of the pilot, and they've already issued a fine. Right. So is that a consideration, reference not just from the US remote ID or the European remote ID, is would there be other effective enforcement methods that take the public out of the equation? Right. So what the public could do is if they spotted someone they suspect was not flying, they have a means of getting onto the app to say, I want to report this to appropriate authorities. And I want to point where I spotted this, when I spotted this. Right. So then remote ID isn't just I'm checking who's flying there now. Is that transmission is captured by some kind of system, and that relates to the serial number and the pilot's contact information. Right. So that's also one note about general public. How much information should they see from the remote ID?
I generally agree with that comment. Like, I think authorities should be able to have access to this to be able to do the enforcement, but public, if they're angry, there's a lot of risk to the pilot and command, which is more of a risk to air safety. But at the same time, though, if that remote ID doesn't allow the public some method to be able to report things that they think are illegal, it doesn't really help the public sentiment on the issue. So I think they shouldn't have access to all the data, but it should allow them some way to let authorities know, I think something illegal is happening in the area.
It would be interesting if that application for detecting drones would be a free app or a paid app.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe in States I saw some of the paid app, but there's also, I mean, with any paid app, there's always the free trial where you see limited information before they ask you to go make a payment, right? Just to echo what Nick mentioned about the possible conflicts that cause air safety, just to give an example, we're talking about maybe 8 years ago. One of our pilots was flying in Oshawa airspace for one of the estate homes, and they were there legally. They called we're talking about back when no time has to be issued, call prior to takeoff and call after landing, right? So they followed all the procedures while they were filming for an estate home, and their drone was hovering above the pool to get a nice shot when the neighbor, who was very upset about this drone, so he took out one of those CO2 guns. He shot a bullet through the arm of the alloy arm of a Phantom 4. And pretty much it was the whole process afterwards, right? Because the pilot had to call ATC, report that I was forced to land, right? I wasn't voluntarily landing. And there was a whole airspace investigation after. So as it turned out, the neighbor spotted another drone that was flying up and down the neighborhood, getting really close to homes the whole week, right? It upset everyone in the neighborhood. So when they spotted this drone hovering above the pool, it became the perfect target. They suspected this was the drone that was just, creating nuisance the whole week. But as it turned out, it wasn't. It was someone who was operating legally and safely. And throughout the years, we've heard reports from both sides. We've had neighbors reporting a drone peeking through the window of their daughter's bedroom, which was very upsetting. But then we also heard other reports when pilots were operating legally, people who thought they were not got into physical confrontations. So there's definitely be different cases from both sides. Okay, next question is, or next comment, it's about related to our earlier comment about how can drones make a bigger effort for the airspace to be safer for crewed aircraft. So this comment is also about general aviation. First responders using ADS-B. I've had more close calls with manned aircraft than RPAS. We share similar situations, unfortunately, as there were times where we spotted helicopters or small crewed aircraft flying really low, and we turn on the flight track or other transponder information, and we do not see any transponder info from those aircraft, and it does cause concerns for drone operations. So again, going back to echoing, the airspace safety takes both parties to contribute into. Okay, next one. My primary concern with remote ID is that whatever TC does, retrofit remote ID dongles should be interoperable with existing widespread systems for cost efficiency. When I asked TC, they did not explicitly say this would be the case. So regarding this, I mean, from regulation perspective, in general, what we have seen is TC tend to impose performance-based requirements, right? They tend to shy away when we ask any questions related to specific models or when this add-on or device was released. They don't tend to give that timeline cutoff, right? Versus in States, we've seen a lot of times where US would say before, right, drones manufactured or entered, made before this time. So in Canada, it's more about performance-based currently. Okay, moving on to next question. So with all the limitations TC is putting CBOs, what is the point of establishing CBOs if you're already certified and registered within Part 9? Good question. That was almost exact my wording during the CBO info session with Transport Canada. I said pretty much if doesn't matter how many people are flying, right, or what you're doing, as long as the operation is within Part 9, there's pretty much no point, especially from AlteX and DV perspective. I said there was no point for us to apply for CBO. And the answer is pretty much affirmative, is if you are operating within Part 9, then you don't really need to apply for CBO. Then you just operate under Part 9. And I also mentioned even if occasionally when we have larger advertised public events, that we have to apply for SFOC to sanction operations on site. So pretty much you can still go through SFOC certain operations that are outside of Part 9. Right, so you don't, I mean, technically speaking, SFOC could be within Part 9. So again, going back to CBOs are not meant for the Part 9 operations or even event operations. And then there was another question about the actual US experience with remote ID regarding privacy concerns of the pilot, number of attacks. Yeah, so any statistical information definitely would be helpful. We don't have any currently, but I will definitely talk about that before we wrap up today, is how we're going to have a channel to allow this discussion to continue, right? Like today when we wrap up, it's definitely not the end of the conversation. It's just about opening the next steps for all of us to contribute.
Well, if just getting back to what you were saying about the CBOs, like there is potential that we wouldn't require visual observers for FPV, which is would be a nice benefit for for members. And as I mentioned before about the ceiling, the ceiling restriction being relieved a bit.
So those are definitely great, and related to MAC members, there's almost essential needs for them. And the other perspective, for example, if I look at for AlteX, for example, is we rarely have the need for a FPV pilot to just fly by themselves. Luckily, for us, there are always multiple pilots here, so there can always be interaction, either spotting for each other or have that interaction among the multiple pilots. And the other side is certain things outside of Part 9, for example, going over 400 feet. For example, there were occasional equipment testing where we're testing weather limitations, right? Where under Part 9 is you need to operate under the manufacturer operating specs. So what if we're doing R&D to test above or beyond those specs? So the conversation is TC would like us to go through SFOC as a commercial entity rather than going through the CBO process.
I saw one comment there on the experience with remote ID regarding people knowing where the pilot is and so on in terms of safety. Now, most of the maybe YouTube videos I've seen, it's really about someone actually seeing the pilot flying a drone and approaching them and so on, rather than
using the remote ID and then go find the pilot.
I haven't seen any of those that I can recall. It's more people just seeing that someone is flying a drone rather than, yeah, there's a drone up in the sky, let me go look for the pilot. So I'm not sure if anybody has had any experience or come across anything like that.
So let me just first say thank you everyone for joining us today and for being part of the discussion. The main message we want to leave with you is that these regulations have not been finalized. We're still at the stage where our industry has an opportunity to provide feedback and help shape what comes next. Both AlteX and DroneVector will continue to share updates and resources. So first, we will be releasing a group feedback page. I believe everyone who's registered and left a email, we will be sending an email with you on the link to take part. That's when you can review the key issues we're bringing forward, and it's an interactive page. You can also participate in our submission as a group to Transport Canada. You can also share the links of that page to others who would like to get involved. But also the last reminder is both from AlteX and DroneVector, we do have our monthly community-based activities. That's when you can actually come meet in person, right? Have some in-person interaction with other people in the industry. Keep in mind that Transport Canada is only one part of the government department. We do have other related policies and regulatory activities. For example, there's municipal bylaw updates, right? They also affect your operations. There are also professional industry updates based on what guidelines and best practices are for drones in, for example, construction engineer industry, drones in different research and other related industries. So again, the regulatory series is only one stream of our updates. If you'd like to get involved, check our email, follow us on social media, and we'd like to hear from everyone.